Okay, welcome back to the Boost Hospitality Podcast. This is a brand new season. This is season number 6, episode 1. And for this season, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I wanted to talk about the world of serviced accommodation. So over the course of this series, you're going to find out everything that there is to know about serviced accommodation. First and foremost, what's it all about? How to get started, the do's and don'ts of getting started, how to grow a serviced accommodation business, the differences between hospitality and serviced accommodation, and also how you can increase direct bookings for everybody in the world of serviced accommodation. So that's going to be the series. For episode 1, I wanted to start right at the very start. And I wanted to go through in this episode and talk about what is serviced accommodation, how is it affecting the world of hospitality, hotels, and most importantly, just find out a little bit more with the people that are making a difference in this industry. So this season, compared to the other ones, I've got guests that are going to come in every single episode, and I'm going to speak to the people that are really making a difference in this industry. Today, we've got a gent called Jason Libin, who is coming on to this podcast. Jason has got a long history with property and service accommodation. I'm going to let him introduce himself in a second. And we're going to go in and we're going to talk about service accommodation and everything else that you need to know. So sit back, relax, and we will get on with the show. So Jason, welcome to the Boost Hospitality Podcast. If you could please just take a couple of minutes and introduce you, your business, and how you got started in serviced accommodation.
Sure. Thanks very much, Mark. And great to be here. Hello, everybody. So my background is very much from the property side. I qualified as a chartered surveyor sort of more years ago than I care to remember, sort of early 1990s. And worked as a commercial planning consultant in London, and had a property there that I'd originally bought, then moved out of and rented out. And then I moved up to Yorkshire and worked in the northeast from the sort of late 90s. And when I got there, I started buying investment property, residential property to let out, and built that up to a pretty significant scale through the 2000s. And as everybody now knows, back into 2007, 8, 9, all became rather difficult, and we sort of scraped through by the skin of our teeth, and really then set about, I suppose, climbing out of the hole we'd fallen into. And part of that was really looking at the properties we'd got and trying to find ways of maximising our return from those properties. And one of those that I became aware of was people letting property out on what was termed serviced accommodation. Now, that is typically just taking a residential rental property and letting it out on a shorter term basis. So typically, if you want to rent a property, most landlords or letting agents, it's 6 months minimum. You've got to sign up, and also it may well be unfurnished, and you've got to pay the bills. Now, serviced accommodation is where it's a much shorter period. Now, some people will do one-night stays. In our own properties, we do a minimum of 2-night stays, and they're fully kitted out. They're fully furnished. Obviously, they've got internet. All the bills are covered. They've got crockery, cutlery, toaster, kettle, all the same stuff you'd have in any self-catering property. Kitted out to quite a high standard, and people come and stay for as long as they wish. Short stay, anything longer than a week. We will normally clean and refresh the linen and the towels, which is all provided on a weekly basis. So we do get quite a lot of broadly termed corporate guests, so people working in the area, often contractors on construction projects, and they might stay for 2 or 3 months, and we go in and sort of do a light clean and a refresh of everything once a week. So it's really self-catering accommodation, but not necessarily, unlike a lot of the hospitality industry, not necessarily in either holiday or pure leisure destinations. So these might be, city centre or even just generally urban areas, anywhere where people are going and, working away from home. So our typical clientele would be people who might otherwise stay in budget hotels, certainly at contractor end of things, budget hotels, smaller B&Bs, family establishments, those sort of things. So, as I say, it's a bit of an intro to me and a bit of a lead into what serviced accommodation is all about, which, as I say, we've been doing with some of our properties for about 5 years now.
And how many properties do you look after in the UK?
So total properties all over our rental stock is about 185, mostly in the northeast. We've got a couple in London and about a dozen in Merseyside. But the short stay stuff, the serviced accommodation, is just in Sunderland, where our office is, and we've got 18 flats or apartments that we use for serviced accommodation. I increasingly I verge towards calling it short stay accommodation, because I think it's a more inclusive term. I think serviced accommodation has particular connotations about it. Some people will say to you, "Oh, serviced accommodation is, where it's being serviced every day, sort of hotel style," and there are no doubt sort of establishments of that nature in larger cities. So, we probably sit somewhere between that and your typical self-catering accommodation where people are staying for a week or more.
Because I think the general misconception and the assumption with serviced accommodation is that it is mostly contractors, business people that are staying at these, but it's not. It's you get holiday goers, who are also staying, people that are just looking for 2 nights away, like I say, short stay accommodation. Where was the term serviced accommodation first coined? Do you remember, or is it just
No, I'm not sure. I think it's one of those things that's been about for years, and I think another misconception is this is something that has just happened in the last few years, and that's absolutely not the case. I can remember staying in a serviced apartment in London 30 years ago. So this sort of short stay accommodation has existed for a long time. I just think for a number of reasons it's perhaps come to the fore, become more prominent. It's a significant growth area at the moment. But as you say, I think we have a very wide range of visitors, and that's often very much location driven. As I say, where our own short stay accommodation is in Sunderland, we definitely get some leisure visitors, and that's whether they're coming for specific events such as the Sunderland Air Show, which is on in July, or the Great North Run, which is on in September, or people coming to visit family and friends, or coming for a wedding or a christening, or all that sort of stuff. From those to people coming, as I say, working in the area on contracts, either in whether that's local factories, refitting shops, bricklayers, building houses, all sorts.
You name it.
All sorts. Yeah.
So what has been the boom in serviced accommodation? Like when I say serviced accommodation, I mean like short stay. What was the catalyst for this? So where you see now all over the country and in towns and cities, you've got people that are taking a residential home and changing it to short stay accommodation.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's probably very difficult to pinpoint, and I think it'd be right to say that there's never sort of one specific factor. I think it's a number of things. I think the rise of say Airbnb it is a significant factor. That certainly kicked off the idea of people renting out a room in their home on a short stay basis, and that business model has morphed into people letting whole properties. The origin of Airbnb was very much someone staying in your home. It's clearly moved on from there, and I think you've then got the likes of Booking.com and the other typical platforms starting to embrace this. Booking.com originally was very much a hotel platform. Now they've embraced the idea that actually people are letting out residential properties. When you do a search on there, there's a specific apartment box you can tick. If you speak to the guys at Booking.com, they have a whole department now called Home, their home department. And I think, I can't remember, from something like 3 years ago, I mean, they went from sort of like 2 people to 20 people in about 12 months. They recognised the growth in that sector and the fact that it was a significant growth sector for them. I think it's been partly driven from looking at it from the property investment end. There were some changes to the tax rules which sort of came in 2 years ago now, about the ability to offset mortgage interest as a cost, and the ability to do that within a standard rental property is now limited, particularly for high rate taxpayers. Whereas if you're doing short stays, that's effectively regarded as a business activity rather than investment activity, and you can offset all of your interest. So there's a significant tax advantage in doing short lets versus normal longer lets. So I think there's been a series of things, and then I think just with that a growing awareness. I mean, and I would class myself within that. If I went to stay somewhere, I'm in North Yorkshire. I typically might get down to London every couple of months. In the past, I would always have stayed in hotels. Now, it depends. I wouldn't always stay in serviced accommodation, but it would certainly be on my radar. And certainly if I was going with more than one person, and I think that's the tipping point for me. If I'm just going for a night on my own, then
business work or whatever. Yeah,
probably just go in a hotel. As soon as you've got 2 or 3 people, where you can rent one apartment for those 2 or 3 people, I just think serviced accommodation is just so much better, so many advantages.
So walk me through like the simplicity of it. So right now, if you are a home owner and you were currently doing a long-term rent model where you had tenants come in and stay for say 6 months to a year, they now have got the ability to change it up because of these new rules that have come in, and they can offer it as a short stay accommodation. You've also got people now that can start up businesses as management companies, and then they can look after properties. So they would approach a landlord or an estate agent and just say, I want to potentially take on a property that is for rent and turn it into a service accommodation, and I have a short stay people come in, like business people, etc. Is that how it is basically working? Or explain to me the different types of service accommodation, explain the different types of businesses that are coming into this, and which can sort of maybe explain why it is booming so much.
Sure. I guess at the simplest level, you've got somebody who owns a property that they want to look at maximising their income out of, and as you say, rather than doing 6 month plus normal tenancies, they say, look, I think there's a market here for doing short stays. So that's the sort of owner operator, if you like. I mean, the one thing I would say as a caveat to all of this, and it is a fantastic business, to get into, and I think it has some real positives as a business. It's highly systemizable. You're dealing with an awful lot of repeat tasks, which means it's very systemizable. You can write procedures for everything. It's easy to outsource. But I would say, unless you're doing it at a certain scale, and there's no magic in the number, but I always think about sort of doing 10 plus units. Unless you're aiming to get to that size, you're probably never going to get the real economies of scale of enabling you to sort of properly outsource. I think if you've got one rental property and you want to do that as short stay accommodation, it's quite a lot of, there's a lot of moving parts to this business. Clearly, you've got people coming and going on a very regular basis. You've got the cleaning to sort out. You've got the linen to sort out. You've got marketing to sort out. You're going to be managing your prices. There's a lot of moving parts. And if you're doing that for one unit, it's probably an awful lot of work for the extra income. But, not saying don't start with one, but I think if you think you're just going to do one and only do one, I'd question whether that really makes sense. I think you've got to look to the scale. But coming back to your original question, so you've got your owner occupier doing it with their own properties, then a lot of people are getting into this market by renting properties from a landlord. It's typically termed sort of rent to rent, or I think I prefer the term leasing a property. So rather than you owning it, you will go to a landlord who's got a property to let, and you will say, look, I will be your tenant effectively. I will rent that property from you, but it's not going to be me or my company that's going to be living in it. I'm then going to be using that to accommodate guests. Short, medium-term guests. And the great thing, there's lots and lots of positives from a landlord point of view, in the sense that, provided that person knows what they're doing and they're generating the income, then, the rent should keep coming in. It's not like that person, like a tenant could lose their job, and then they'd struggle to pay the rent. That shouldn't happen. As an operator of serviced accommodation, you're going to want to keep that property to a high standard. You're probably going to want to typically go in every 2 or 3 months and touch up the paintwork and, maybe thoroughly clean the carpets and all those sort of things, which is far better than any tenant will treat a landlord's property.
Yeah.
there's a lot of positives around that. So that's another model, sort of renting or leasing. And if you look at hotels, I mentioned Travelodge earlier. Basically, that's what Travelodge do. They don't own the buildings they operate in, or in the vast majority of cases, there'll be an investment company that owns that building. They will lease it and then let out the rooms to their guests. So on a much smaller scale, that's what you're doing. You're basically letting the property from an investor landlord. You're acting as the operator, and then you're getting the guests in and looking after those guests. So that's one way of doing it, leasing. Or as you mentioned, you can manage. You could approach landlords and say, look, rather than getting £600 a month on a rent, I think we could get an extra £300 a month, or we could get an extra £600 a month, and we'll then split that. We'll take half as the management fee, and you can take the other half as extra profit. So again, working with landlords to maximise their profit. You could either do that on a pure management basis, where you say, well, we'll just charge you a management fee, which might typically be anywhere between sort of 15 and low 20% of the income for a fully managed. So you might do a pure management model, or you might do some sort of part management, part profit share. There's sort of every variation, really.
There seems to be like lots of different variations of getting into this business, but you can see.
Fundamentally, it comes back to you, whether you're acting as the owner operator, leased operator, management company. Effectively, you're doing all the same work.
Mm-hmm. It's just under a different type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And there are various pros and cons with each of those different ways of doing things.
And a question that has just come up whilst you've been talking is, how easy is it to get started? Say that me, never done it before. Mm-hmm. This sounds really good. I want to start approaching landlords. Like, how easy is it for me to get started? Is there any rules or regulations I have to go through, any accreditation, or can I just simply start doing the research and get started now?
It's surprisingly unregulated, and whether that will continue in the same vein, I perhaps doubt. I think regulation in some form, may well come, and it's one of, I think, to some extent, part of the hotel industry's gripe about the growth in this type of accommodation is that they are subject to much greater regulation. Yeah. You are obliged to undertake, for instance, a fire risk assessment. But there's no strict certification of anything that needs to go on. So from that point of view, it is relatively easy. And in terms of approaching landlords, some people, I would say, because you're approaching, whether it's from a rent to rent leasing point of view, you're approaching the landlord, you're approaching a letting agent, and you're trying to sell them an idea that's something that maybe they've got no understanding of. And that can sometimes be a little bit challenging. Some people find it, easier than others, just like, I suppose, any sales job. Some people are more, natural in terms of their aptitude for selling. I mean, they are selling a concept rather than a product. So, but in terms of, as you say, in terms of regulation, in terms of barriers to entry, really there aren't any. And certainly when I got into this business, admittedly with properties we owned, but one of the things that struck me in terms of getting out there and marketing is, because you can immediately jump on the likes of Booking.com and Airbnb. You can start this with nil marketing budget, because you only pay those guys when you get a booking. Mm-hmm. Okay, you do pay, and it's a decent commission, but to me, I hadn't got an issue with that, because I hadn't got to, let's face it, most businesses these days, before you even open the doors, you've got to have a website, you've got to think about your digital marketing and your more traditional marketing. Whereas with this, you can start day one. And just as your first step, get it on Airbnb and Booking.com. And I'm not saying that's where your business starts and ends, but you can start, with very little capital.
Yeah. Just get it on and get going.
Yeah, of course you then want to build on that and have a website and do other marketing and those sort of things. But it's not, say, perhaps unlike other businesses.
And that's when they come to Boostly, and that's when they come get a website. I know, that's what. All right, so next thing then that I'm really interested to know is that if people do jump on this, there's no accreditation, there's no regulation, they literally do jump in, they do a bit of research and they get started. What is the most common mistake that you see people making in the industry when they're getting going?
There's a number, to be honest. I think one of them is probably, depending on what their background is. I think if people have come from the hospitality side, then they probably don't make some of these mistakes. But one of the big mistakes, particularly coming from the property side, is not understanding that that you need to actively manage your pricing. You know, your pricing should be very dynamic. And the easiest way to explain that to people, because everyone understands it, is you know, the EasyJet model. You know, EasyJet launch a flight in November, and you can get on that flight for 30 quid. But that price gets actively managed, and and if they launch that flight in August, it won't be 30 quid to start with anyway. So there's a seasonality to it. But they basically run sort of two pricing models, but they basically run an occupancy pricing model. So basically they have thresholds that when 5 seats get sold, the price goes up 5 quid. Another 5 seats get sold, it goes up another 5 quid, and so you go on. So unlike a sort of rental property where it's £600 a month and that's what it is, you'll have, you might have, and typically you would have, different prices for almost even every day of the week. Typically within the hospitality industry, Sunday is always your quietest night. So if you're pricing by the night, Sunday needs to be your cheapest night. Typically, Friday and Saturday are probably your busiest nights, but equally there are locations where your midweek market is stronger than your weekend market, and you've got to know your market.
Yeah,
your Monday might be one price, Tuesday might be a bit more. So it's that initial pricing is, you don't just say, right, it's £70 a night across every day of the week, every month of the year. You've got a different price for every day of the week, and then what you've got to do is constantly review those prices. I would say probably at least every week, to see what's the demand in the area, what are my competitors doing, are they, and whilst, if you like, you're not directly competing with the Travelodge down the road, they're a useful indicator, because if they start putting their price up, it's because they've seen an increase in demand. Now, you may not have seen that increase in demand yet, but you can pretty much guarantee if they have, you will. So you can afford to start pushing your prices up even before the demand hits.
Yeah.
So that whole dynamic pricing thing is something that's, as I say, particularly if people come from the property investment side, is something that's sort of wholly new.
I guess if there's a service accommodation owner who's listening to this and thinking, well, how do I even get started in that? One of the simplest things that you can do is look at your calendar, go on, say, Sunderland, go to what's on in Sunderland and just box off the next 3 months or 6 months, and just look for any big events, any concerts, anything that's big that's coming to town. The example in the story that I can give you from a hospitality point of view is based in Scarborough. My family business has got a farm stay, hotel, guest house, cottages here in Scarborough. In 2018, we had Britney Spears play in Scarborough, and it was announced in January, and the event and the concert was sold out pretty much within 24 hours. So being a bit proactive, you go on, you instantly close out any dates to the online travel agents via your channel manager. So whether you're using Tokeet or Free to Book or whoever, so that's totally blocked off the dates on there. So you're guaranteed to get your direct booking. And then what you do is you put the rates up, because you know that when that gets announced, there's two things that people do. They book the tickets and they look for accommodation. And if you're savvy and if you've got a good presence, then people will naturally come to your website and book with you. And then all you need to do is just, again, like what Jason is saying, assess it every week or every month. And the closer it gets to the date, if you've still got availability for those dates, you just start to slowly put the price back down to what your normal rate is. And then you start to open it back up to the OTA. So like Jason said right at the very start, make these booking.com, make Airbnb work for you and not the other way around. So if you have got anything that needs selling last minute, put it up on those, and I can guarantee that you will get those bookings. So that is exactly it. And we sold out like for those dates pretty much within 48, 72 hours. And this was in January. The concert was in August. money in the bank, guaranteed bookings coming in, and we were able to manipulate the market, assess with the market. So that's 100% something that everybody should be doing. And and I think, if you're a service accommodation owner, definitely looking at your pricing is one.
Those things can make a huge difference. And again, to use a similar example, we had the Spice Girls in Sunderland in early June this year. We did exactly that. As soon as we heard, we just blocked the calendar off, and then we don't normally do one night stays. We knew there would be a demand for one night stays. And the reason we don't is because obviously you've still got your fixed cleaning, linen, turnaround costs, and it generally makes, apart from the fact one night stays are a bit of a pain in the neck, it makes your profit margin is much thinner on a one night stay. So, but knowing that we would get premium prices for those nights, or for that night, we opened up our calendar for one night stays, and I think we were getting. So I think the best week. So and as we booked, each time we got an apartment book, we just put the price up on the whole lot. Every time a booking came in, we just pushed the price up again, and I think we got up to for an apartment that we might normally get something between, say, £60 and £80 a night, we were getting £275 a night for that.
That's it. You've covered your, and that's, like I say, and where you're thinking, I've got to do a one night stay, but realistically, what you've just got is a 5-night booking for the price of one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can get somebody in the next night who's going to then stay, two nights. So it's a case of not just looking at the singularity, not just looking at it as a singular event, looking at an overall series of events. And I say, it just makes so much sense. So if you're being proactive over it instead of reactive, then yeah, you'll win. You said there's a number of mistakes that you see people make. What's maybe one of the other ones that's on top of your mind, apart from pricing and knowing your market?
Yeah, so pricing is a big one. There was one I was thinking of, and it slipped my mind now. We got stuck into pricing.
You said about knowing the market. So to me, that's doing your planning and your preparation. Is that sort of what you meant alongside that?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess the other thing actually is very much feeds into the marketing side. As I said, starting as a sort of first port of call, Booking.com, Airbnb, will get you a level of bookings. I think where people make a mistake is that they think they can completely rely on those, for all of their business, and they're going to consistently get 70, 80, 90% occupancy just from being on those platforms, on those OTAs. And it's not the case. As most markets are, competitive market. You've got to start to go above and beyond. And they will give you a base of business, but you've got to get out there, and whether that's direct marketing, to local corporates, whether that's online marketing, website, digital marketing, email marketing, all the things that you talk so much about. And again, I guess because certainly from the property side, those are things that you wouldn't normally have to do. Yeah, you have to do some marketing to let a property, but you might just give it to a letting agent, or you might just stick it on Rightmove and Gumtree, and the chances are that will get you your letting. But with serviced accommodation, you're constantly trying to, as with any business, squeeze the margins. So the difference between being 70% occupied and 80%, might mean you're doubling your profit.
Yeah, 100%. And like I say, and we spoke about this before we came live on the call, if you build your house on somebody else's land, it's going to fail. If you just rely 100% on Booking.com and Airbnb, but what happens if they turn around one day and close your account for the simplest of things, and then you're stuck? So it's always good to be, like you say, being proactive, trying to increase your amount of direct bookings, because at the end of the day, you're instantly making at least 15% more money, more profit, which over a singular booking may not seem all that much, but if you base it over a year, that's a hell of a number. All right, so we've
coming back to the mistakes. I remember what I was going to say now.
Oh yeah.
So I think a lot of people get into this, and I think this is interesting, because I think it may equally apply to other areas of the hospitality industry. And I think people look sometimes at their operational side far too much from their own perspective, in terms of what suits them, in terms of when do I want people to check in and out, when non-refundables, deposits, cancellation periods. Because in an ideal world, from from an operator point of view, you'd want everybody paying 100% when they book. You want them paying a deposit. You want them all turning up between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, and all leaving between 10:30 and 11:30 in the morning. But if that's the way you approach your business, then effectively what you're doing is you're massively constraining your demand. Because if your property's sat alongside 3 others and someone's looking at yours and it says you can only check in between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, and someone says, well, what if we're late? And I know that's a slightly extreme example, but you do see examples of significant constraints, where, as I say, where all rates are non-refundable. So I want to book somewhere in 6 months, so I've got to pay now, and you're just going to sit on my money.
Yeah.
So I think that's a mistake where people look at it, and the way it's been described to me is, you need to look at your business from the outside in, i.e. from the guest perspective, whereas too many people, I think, look at their business from the inside out and say, I'm going to run my business to suit me, rather than actually thinking about the whole guest experience. And
yeah, I mean, it's a great bit of advice that I think so many people overlook. But at the end of the day, if you're not appealable to your guests, then they're never going to come back and they're never going to talk about you. But if you make your business and you base it around your guests and you suit it around your guests and you develop a system and structure where it does meet your guests, then they are going to recommend you. They are going to come back and they're going to be your best customers. I mean, one of the biggest mistakes that I see hospitality owners, service accommodation owners, business owners in general, is they're always looking for new customers. When if they just paid a bit of attention to the people that have already given them money, that have already built up that know, like, and trust, then you could make much more money and have much better guests. And there's a fantastic blog everybody should go read. It's 1,000 True Fans by Kevin Kelly. It's a free blog. You can go out and find it, look at it on Google, and it's a prime example that somebody should be looking at into their business every single time.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about common mistakes, and I think as you know, I know, everybody that is listening to this who is in the SA world, there is a lot of advice given at the moment. There's obviously, with this becoming a booming industry and more people are getting into it, there is, of course, loads of people that are starting to give advice. There's lots of people that have started up mentoring in this industry. There's a lot of people that are basically saying, I've done this, now follow my advice. A lot of it is good advice, a lot of it is bad advice, but what is the one bit of advice that you've seen in the industry that you don't agree with? What would that be?
I guess some of the bad advice around planning, about planning use classes, because basically a residential property, to get into sort of a bit of geeky planning, is use class C3, and use class C1 is hotels, guest houses, and boarding houses technically, which obviously includes B&Bs and sort of similar establishments. Now there are people who are going around saying that to run let's say just a bog standard house, as letting it as a whole house to a family, that you require C1 planning consent. But absolutely you don't. It's not a hotel, guest house or boarding house, quite clearly. And I would say to people, most holiday accommodation, it's just a standard residential use class. There have been a couple of planning appeal decisions which I think are questionable, which start to go down the route of saying, well, if you've got different people staying there every night, have you not materially changed that use in planning terms? Still doesn't make it a hotel or C1. It then strays into a use class of its own, which, again, to get a bit geeky, is something that's called sui generis, which means a use class on its own. I don't believe, so it's difficult because there have been a couple of appeal decisions, but they're not court decisions. They're not legally binding. It can only be used as sort of advice or indicative advice on other things. But certainly when I first got in, there were a lot of people saying, oh, it needed to be C1, or in order to put your property on business rates, it needs to be C1. I mean, that's just total nonsense. Any property that's let for short lets commercially for more than 140 days a year should be on business rates. most holiday accommodation, assuming it's being commercially let rather than just occupied as a second home, it should be on business rates. There's another big tax advantage called capital allowances, which hopefully people in the more commercial world, the B&Bs, the hotels, pubs of this world, should know something about that. And if they don't, I'd encourage them to go and find out about capital allowances, because it may actually significantly reduce your tax bill. Certainly if you've bought a property or renovated your property at all, then go and find out something about capital allowances. And again, you don't need to, as a short stay operator of a residential property, it does not need to be C1 to claim capital allowances. So that there's a lot of bad advice around that.
Yeah, definitely. And I can see why so many people would fall for it, because as soon as you started saying those letters to me, my head just glazed over with what? Yeah. So I can see that if you get somebody that is up there on the stage, or in a course that you're a part of, and it's saying that, then you're going to do that. So thanks for sharing that. I think personally for me, from what I've seen and I've researched into service accommodation, rent to rent, whatever you want to call it, I think there's so many people who are getting into this industry under the false pretenses, because they get told this magical word passive income, and they get sold the dream. And I've heard this from a lot of people, is that they're basically being put down this route by saying that when you do this, when you open up the doors and you get your first rental, you whack it up on Airbnb, whack it up on booking.com, and that's it, your job's done. You're going to be making $1,000 a month or whatever it may be. And I think for a lot of people, they have to realize that this is probably one of the most stressful jobs that you are going to have, because there's, like you said, so many moving parts. You've got to get people through the door, then you've got to then start looking after your guest, and then once the guest leaves, you've then got to sort out the clean, the changeover to get ready for the next guest. And there's so many things that change and alter, and the things that could go wrong do go wrong. And you've got one property. Just imagine when you build up and you've got 2 or 3 or 4. Now, it's not like a hotel or a guest house where you've got 14 bedrooms in one property and all you have to do is go up and down stairs. Imagine if you've got 4 or 5 properties spread out around Sunderland or around town, and you've got to literally get in your car 10 o'clock at night because you for whatever reason, you've got to get across town to fix something because you haven't got the systems and the structure and that lot built up. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I've noticed. And like you say, there's so much advice out there that you just got to be really careful that you make sure that you are working with or working alongside or investing in somebody that knows what they're talking about, which does lead in nicely to what you do. So, you've got your background, you've done this for many years, you've built a big portfolio, you're looking after over 150 properties, which is amazing. So what are you doing now moving forward to help the industry, help SA, help people who want to get into SA?
Sure. Well, for a while now, I've held various sort of events for people to come to, but we've slightly sort of moved on from there, because what I found is with those events, it's an awful lot of time and effort to put them on, and also people have got there's obviously a cost for people to attend, which is related to the cost of putting them on. People have got to travel; they've maybe got to take a day out of their week to come to that event. And and all of those things are a constraint. So I thought it would be far better to try to help people, online in a way that they can access that when they want to, that works for them. So they can catch an hour, early morning, evening, whatever. So I recently launched the Short Stay Living Academy, which is an online membership platform. And each month, what we do is we have a guest, an expert guest, and Mark's been our most recent guest talking about marketing. So we've had a guest on talking about working with letting agents and landlords. We've got a guest coming on next month talking about the whole pricing thing I was talking about, and how to manage your prices. So an expert focus each month. And we do live Q&As with those experts, so people can digest the content, digest the information, come back and ask questions. And my whole focus with that really is to give people massively valuable but implementable information for a relatively low monthly cost. compared with a lot of the sort of big headline courses out there. We're talking a much smaller level of investment. Now, off the back of that, what I want to do, particularly for people who really want to get started and really want a lot of information, the sort of A to Z, we will be launching an online course alongside or as part of the Short Stay Living Academy, and hopefully that should be launched by the end of the month. So not end of the summer. There's a lot of information to pull together to launch that. Again, really to give people real nuts and bolts as to how to launch and run and scale a serviced accommodation business. And I, to be honest, like you, I just really enjoy helping people and seeing, the results that those people can achieve, with the right help and support and knowledge.
That's amazing. That's really good. So if you're listening to this in, say, September or October 2019, because the beauty of podcasts is that it is evergreen and it sits there forever. So if you're watching this is being recorded in June 2019. So if you're listening back in October 2019, you can already head to what Jason is talking about and be able to sign up. So if they want to go and find out more about you, more about the SSL, more about anything really to do with yourself, where's the best place for people to head to, Jason?
Probably the best starting point is I've got a Facebook group, a serviced accommodation group on Facebook, which is fantastic. Got nearly 10,000 people there, called the Serviced Accommodation Network UK. What I'd encourage people to do is come along and join that. That's free, and there's some really, really helpful people on there. What I would encourage people to do, rather than just launch in and say, because you get people coming on and their first question is, how do I run a serviced accommodation business? And what I always say to people is, look, just spend some time trawling through, because there's an awful lot of information on here, and then come back with some specific questions. So that's a free starting point. But from that, please come on and ask questions, and we talk about the Short Stay Living Academy on there, and put forward various offers. People will get an offer when they join the free group to come on board for the academy, and I'm, if you can contact me, Jason Living, on Facebook via Facebook Messenger, that's probably the easiest way, and I'll certainly do everything I can to help.
So you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, most platforms. If they just type in Jason Living Property, Serviced Accommodation, I'm sure they'll be able to find you. Thank you very much for coming on and talking about that. And hopefully by now, if anybody's never heard of Serviced Accommodation, they have a better idea of this and moving forward. And like you say, if you want to get started, the best place to do it is the Serviced Accommodation Network. Is it UK? UK, yeah. Because there are, if you type in Serviced Accommodation in Facebook, there is a lot you're going to get presented with. So it's Serviced Accommodation Network UK. Just look for Jason. He's the admin of the group. And that's a perfect place to start, and then to find out more about the SSL as well. All right. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Boost Hospitality podcast. This is season 6, episode 1. If this is the first time that you have listened to one of my podcasts, you've got 5 seasons that you can now catch up on. Go to boostly.co.uk/podcast. We've done so many different variations of seasons, from how to run the perfect Facebook competition to explain about what hospitality owners are doing on a day-to-day basis to boost their bookings, and also as well just breaking down some of the jargons and the myths and showing you 5 steps that you can take to boost your direct bookings today. But my name is Mark Simpson, founder of Boostly. If you want to go find out more, go to boostly.co.uk. And if you'd like to leave a review, please head over to iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast and leave one of those lovely 5-star reviews for us. But thank you very much for tuning in, and we will catch you for another episode of the Boost Hospitality podcast very soon.